Homeless veteran recognized Bruce at Newark train station. What Bruce did next made him cry. Bruce Springsteen was rushing through Newark Penn Station when a weathered voice called his name from the shadows. The homeless veteran sitting against the cold concrete wall had recognized the boss immediately. But what he said next stopped Bruce dead in his tracks. What happened in the next 15 minutes didn't just change one man's life. It reminded everyone why Bruce Springsteen has always been more than just a rock star. If these incredible stories about music's most compassionate legends move you, subscribe. This journey gets unbelievable. November 15th, 2019. Newark Penn Station. 11:47 p.m. The last PATH train to Manhattan was boarding, and Bruce Springsteen was late. He'd been visiting his mother in Freehold, staying longer than planned because she seemed frailer lately, more distant. The drive back had taken forever due to an accident on the turnpike, and now Bruce was practically jogging through the station, hoping to catch the final train to the city. That's when he heard it. "Bruce. Hey, Bruce Springsteen." The voice was rough, cracked by years of hard living. Bruce almost kept walking. In 47 years of fame, he'd learned to recognize the difference between fans and people who needed something more than an autograph. But something about this voice made him stop, something familiar. The man sitting against the station wall looked like he was 60, but Bruce suspected he was younger. His face was weathered by decades of sleeping rough, his beard long and unkempt, his clothes layered against the November cold. In front of him was a worn military duffel bag and a cardboard sign that read, "Veteran. Anything helps. God bless." But his eyes held a clarity that cut through everything else. "You probably don't remember me," the man said, struggling to stand. "Staff Sergeant Tommy Morelli, 1st Infantry Division. We met in Germany on 1987. Bruce's world stopped. 1987. The Tunnel of Love Tour. Bruce had done a USO show at Ramstein Air Base, one of dozens of military performances over the years. But he remembered this one. He remembered because of what happened after the show, when a young sergeant had approached him backstage. "Tommy?" Bruce said quietly. "Oh my God. Tommy from Newark." Tommy's face crumbled. "You remember?" How could Bruce forget? That night in Germany, 21-year-old Tommy Morelli had waited 3 hours after the show to tell Bruce about his little sister Maria. She was dying of leukemia back home in Newark, and Tommy was desperate to get leave to see her one last time. His commanding officer had denied the request. Too many soldiers were already on leave, he'd been told. Maria died 6 days later, while Tommy was thousands of miles away, unable to say goodbye. Bruce had made phone calls, used whatever influence he had, got Tommy emergency leave approved, but it was too late. By the time Tommy reached Newark, Maria was already gone. "I never got to thank you," Tommy said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "For trying, for caring about some kid from the neighborhood you'd never met." Bruce looked at this man, this soldier who'd served his country and somehow ended up sleeping in train stations, and felt something break inside his chest. "What happened, Tommy? How did you end up here?" The story came out slowly. PTSD from 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Difficulty adjusting to civilian life. A marriage that fell apart. Drinking that got out of control. Medical bills from injuries that disability payments couldn't cover. And the slow slide from struggling to surviving to just existing. "I tried to find you a few times over the years," Tommy admitted. "Wanted to thank you proper, but I was ashamed. Look at me. The kid you tried to help turned into this. Tommy. Bruce's voice was firm. Listen to me. You didn't turn into anything. You're still the same man who loved his sister enough to fight the army to see her one last time. Oh, you're still the soldier who served his country. You're still Tommy from Newark. That's when Bruce made a decision that would change everything. Come on, Bruce said, picking up Tommy's duffel bag. We're getting out of here. Bruce, I can't. I look like hell. I smell worse. I don't care. Bruce's voice carried that quiet authority that had commanded stages for decades. My train can wait. We're going to get some food, and you're going to tell me everything that's happened since Germany. The diner Bruce chose was a 24-hour place called Mickey's, on 3 blocks from the station. The kind of working-class joint Bruce had grown up in, where nobody would care about celebrities or homeless veterans or anything except whether you treated people with respect. Over coffee and eggs, Tommy's story unfolded. 3 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, citations for valor that he'd pawned years ago to pay rent. A mind that couldn't quiet down, that heard explosions and car backfires and saw enemies in shadows. A VA system that was overwhelmed and underfunded. Medications that helped some days and failed others. But more than anything, Tommy talked about guilt. I survived when better men didn't, he said, staring into his coffee. Maria died while I was playing soldier. My buddies came home in boxes while I got to walk away. What kind of sense does that make? Bruce listened. Really listened. The way he'd learned to listen growing up in Freehold. When his father came home from the factory with that look in his eyes that said the world was grinding him down. The way he'd learned to listen to the stories in his songs, to the voices of people who felt forgotten. Tommy, Bruce said finally. Survival isn't a betrayal of the dead. It's a responsibility to the living. That's when Bruce told Tommy about his own struggles. The depression that had nearly destroyed him in the 80s. The guilt he'd carried about writing songs about working-class life when he'd become wealthy beyond imagination. The weight of representing people who felt like nobody else was listening. I learned something, Bruce continued. The guilt never goes away completely, but it can become fuel. It can power you to do something that honors the people you've lost. Maria, your buddies, they don't need your guilt. They need your life to mean something. By 3 a.m., Mickey's was empty except for Bruce, Tommy, and a tired waitress who kept refilling their coffee cups without being asked. Bruce had made more phone calls than Tommy could count. To his management company, to VA advocates he'd worked with, to a rehabilitation center in New Jersey that specialized in helping homeless veterans. But the most important call was to his old friend John Bon Jovi. John, it's Bruce. I need a favor. Bruce stepped outside the diner to make the call. Remember that veterans housing project you've been working on in Red Bank? I've got someone who needs help, and I want to fund his treatment personally. When Bruce returned to the table, Tommy was staring at a business card Bruce had left beside his coffee cup. The card had a phone number and an address in Red Bank. Tomorrow morning, you call that number, Bruce said. Tell them Bruce Springsteen sent you. They're expecting you. It's a program that helps veterans get back on their feet. Housing, counseling, job training. Whatever you need. Tommy's hands were shaking as he held the card. Bruce, I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. Bruce leaned forward. I'm asking you to get well, to find a way to live with the guilt instead of dying from it, to honor Maria and your buddies by building a life that means something. The sun was coming up by the time they left Mickey's diner. Bruce drove Tommy to the rehabilitation center personally in his pickup truck, No fanfare, no cameras. Just two guys from New Jersey, one helping the other find his way home. 3 months later, Tommy Morelli was clean, sober, and living in transitional housing. He'd started counseling for PTSD and was working part-time at a local automotive shop. Augusta, but more importantly, he'd found purpose. Tommy began volunteering with other homeless veterans, using his own story to reach men and women who'd given up hope. He carried Maria's photograph in his wallet again, not as a source of guilt, but as a reminder of love worth fighting for. 6 months after that night at Newark Penn Station, Tommy called Bruce. "I wanted you to know," Tommy said. "I got a job, full-time, supervisor at the garage, and I'm getting married. Met a woman at the VA who understands about the nightmares." Bruce was quiet for a long moment. "Tommy, that's incredible. I'm proud of you." "Bruce?" Tommy's voice was thick with emotion. Maria would have loved this story. Her big brother getting a second chance. "Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." The call ended, but the story didn't. Tommy Morelli went on to become a peer counselor for homeless veterans. He's helped more than 200 men and women find housing, treatment, and hope. He speaks at conferences about veteran homelessness, always carrying Maria's photograph, always ending his talks with the same message. Sometimes the difference between surviving and thriving is one person who believes you're worth saving. Bruce never spoke publicly about that night at Newark Penn Station. He didn't need to. The quiet heroism he'd learned growing up in Freehold, the understanding that real strength comes from lifting others up. That's not something you advertise. It's something you live. But Tommy tells the story. At VA hospitals and homeless shelters, at veterans meetings and community centers. He tells it because he understands what Bruce understood that night in Mickey's Diner. Sometimes the most important concerts aren't played on stages. Sometimes the most powerful songs aren't sung with guitars. Sometimes changing the world happens one conversation at a time, one act of compassion at a time, one human being deciding that another human being matters. People who know Bruce Springsteen aren't surprised by this story. They know that the boss who sings about factory workers and small-town dreams, boss who writes anthems for the forgotten and the struggling, is the same man who stops everything when someone needs help. Today, Tommy Morelli runs a nonprofit organization in Newark called Maria's Hope, providing transitional housing and support services for homeless veterans. The program has helped over 800 veterans find permanent housing and employment. Every veteran who enters the program receives a small card with Maria's photograph and a simple message. Your life has meaning. Your story matters. Unwelcome home. On the wall of Tommy's office hangs a framed photograph from that night at Mickey's Diner. Bruce had asked the tired waitress to take it before they left. In the photo, two men from New Jersey sit across from each other, one famous, one forgotten, both understanding something profound about what it means to truly see another human being. Bruce still stops by the program when he's in New Jersey. No cameras, no publicity. Just the boss checking on his friend Tommy, listening to new stories of veterans finding their way home, us occasionally picking up a guitar to play My Hometown in the center's common room. Tommy Morelli learned something that night that changed his life forever. Heroes aren't always on stage. Sometimes they're sitting across from you in a diner at 3 a.m., listening to your story, believing in your worth when you've forgotten it yourself. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to save a life. The last time they spoke, Tommy asked Bruce a question that had been weighing on him for years. Why me? Why did you stop that night when so many other people walked past? Bruce was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Tommy would never forget. Because 32 years ago, a young soldier cared enough about his little sister to fight the entire army for leave he never got to use. That kind of love doesn't disappear, Tommy. It just gets lost sometimes. I was just helping you find it again. Every November 15th, Tommy returns to Newark Penn Station, not to remember his lowest moment, but to celebrate his transformation. He brings flowers for Maria's grave. He sits in the same spot where Bruce found him, not as a homeless veteran, but as living proof that one moment of compassion can change everything. Because that's what music really is, Tommy often tells the veterans he counsels. It's the rhythm of human kindness, the harmony of people helping each other. And sometimes, if you listen carefully to the sounds echoing through Newark Penn Station, you can still hear the beginning of that song. Bruce Springsteen kept playing his music, kept singing his songs about working-class hope and small-town dreams. But he also kept making phone calls. He kept connecting with people who needed more than entertainment. He kept being the boss in the best possible way, by never forgetting where he came from, and never walking past someone who needed help. Because that's what heroes do. They recognize that everyone has a story worth saving, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen